Hello guys and welcome to Quipoin. So in the last video of SVG part 2, we looked into the operation of path and text. In this video, we are going to look into the operation of polygon and how to draw gradient in SVG. So without any further delay, hit that like button, subscribe to Quipoin and let's get started. Now we come to the last operation, that is polygon. The last operation which is essential and the most important, that is polygon. And polygon is basically drawing n number of polygon. So you have to basically give again the coordinates, and the coordinate will be same as in polyline: x comma y1, x2 comma y2, x3 comma y3. This is how you give the coordinates. And how you do that: instead of polyline you write polygon, and then you write the points and again write the point. For example, if you want, if let's say if we give 5 point, it will be a pentagon. Okay, so 100 comma 10 and 40 comma 198, then 198 and then 190 comma let's say 78. So you can see a polygon has been created. And if I give something like 50 comma 500, so you can see how a polygon has been created. So this is how you create a polygon in SVG. And you can again fill and use stroke attributes to it. If you use fill equals to red, so it will be filled with red. And this is how you draw a polygon. We are done with all the operations. Okay, now we will be moving on with the color gradient in SVG. Now there are two types of color gradient, as in the canvas also we learned the two types of color gradient, that were linear gradient and the other was radial gradient. So the linear gradient, we are going to implement the linear gradient first. And how to implement the linear gradient: so basically for defining a linear gradient, we use a tag called linear gradient. Linear gradient. So this is a tag which is used to define a linear gradient in SVG. And again you have to give it an ID. I'll give ID, say LG, and then the x1. I'll just explain what are these. Y1, then the x2, and then the y2. So you need these 4 values to define a linear gradient. Now what are these? ID is basically the unique identifier to your linear gradient. And now what are these x1, y1, x2, y2? These are nothing but it define the direction of the gradient. So x1, y1, x2, y2 basically define the direction of your gradient. Now the input here are nothing but from what to what gradient it should go. For example, here I am just going to define it from 0% and 0% to 100% to 100%. So in this case it goes from left, that is x1, y1, from 0% to 0% to the right, that is 100% to the 100%. So this is how you define a linear gradient. This is quite important. Just remember this, define the gradient. Now if you want like 3 colors, so you have to put again x3 and y3, and you have to give it direction. But here I am only defining 2 gradients, so I am taking 2 points, that is x1, y1 and x2, y2. Now as you write this, just go here. Now we will use something called stop. What is this stop? I'll just write here stop. Now what is this stop tag? Stop is nothing but it defines where the color gradient should stop, and it has attributes. It has two main attributes called offset. This offset is nothing but it is the position where the gradient should stop. So if I say stop offset will be 0%, so basically my color will stop, my first color will stop at 0%. And then comes something called style. So style basically defines your opacity and what color is going into the gradient. Okay, so like if I write here stop, and style will be my stop gradient, stop color. Okay, so what will be my stop color? My stop color will be, let's pick from here. Okay, this color seems good. Okay, so we'll pick this color and let's define a stop opacity. So for example, let's say 1. So this is how offset and style works. Offset is nothing but it is the position of stop in the gradient as % of gradient vector, and style basically define the color and opacity of the stop. Now I'll just close it, and the first stop has been created. Now again just copy paste it, and control V. Now the second color of the gradient, we need to define that. It would be 100% from the right, and the stop color should be, let's say, this color. Seems good. And the opacity will be 1. This is how you define a linear gradient. Okay, so the setup of the linear gradient has been completed. Now our linear gradient has been defined. Put it into graphics. We have to first make a graphic. So quickly we can make a rectangle. It is quite simple. My rectangle has been defined. Now what we will do, how to color the rectangle, I already mentioned we use fill, but in this case if we just type red, then there is no gradient. Then how to use this gradient that we have created? For that is why I use this ID. This ID will help in linking this fill to this linear gradient. And how it will work? It will work as a URL. Okay, you just have to write a URL and RL hashtag and then the ID, and you can see our gradient has been created. Okay, so this is how a gradient is created. So you can see I just wrote URL and then hashtag the ID of the linear gradient. So it took the linear gradient, and I told you how to define a linear gradient here. So this is how you define a linear gradient. Okay, now it is very similar to the radial gradient. Radial gradient is very similar to this. Just instead of linear gradient, you have to write radial gradient. You just have to replace it with radial gradient. Okay, radial gradient, and you can see a radial gradient appearing here. Okay, so this is how you define a gradient. So, basically if I use a circle here, it will be more clear. Circle. Okay, and just remove it, and just R equals to 300 or 50. Okay, so let's say 300 only, and this will go. Okay, CX will be 100 and CY will be 100. I'll just define the canvas here. Width equals to 500 and GIGST height equals to 500, and let the radius be 30. So it is too small. 100. Okay, 100. So you can see a radial gradient here. very clearly. It is more visible in circle. So this is how you define a radial gradient and a linear gradient in HTML. In the next part, we will be looking into few more of the operations of SVG.